The crystal chandelier in the Willow Creek Community Center cast a forgiving golden glow over the annual HOA Gala, softening the Botox and highlighting the diamonds on the fingers of the neighborhood's self-appointed elite. The air smelled of catered chicken cordon bleu and expensive Chardonnay, a cloying mix of forced civility and suburban one-upmanship. From my seat at table 7, I had an unobstructed view of the main stage where Karen Whitaker held court like a queen on her plastic throne. At 52, Karen was the undisputed ruler of Willow Creek Estates. Her helmet of perfectly highlighted blonde hair didn't move in the breeze from the AC vents, and her pastel pink cardigan was buttoned with military precision over a white blouse that screamed, "I'm just a concerned neighbor." Tonight she wore her favorite accessory, the glittering HOA president sash that she treated like a royal title. The object of her affection, or rather, the mirror of her ego, was her daughter Nora, perched beside her in crimson silk, a vibrant splash against the sea of beige blazers and navy polos. Nora, 28 and still living rent-free in the McMansion 2 streets over, had always been the sun around which Karen's little empire spun. From my quiet corner I watched the performance unfold with the detached calm I'd perfected over 6 long years. Karen's voice rang out as she tapped her glass with a manicured nail. "If I could have everyone's attention," she began, her tone dripping with that fake sweetness that made my teeth ache. The room quieted instantly. They knew better than to disobey. "I just want to say a few words on this special night. 10 years of keeping Willow Creek the most beautiful, orderly community in the state." Polite applause rippled through. She beamed, soaking it in like a vampire in sunlight. "But more than that," she continued, scanning the room, her eyes gliding right over me as if I were part of the wallpaper. "I've always believed that some residents truly embody the spirit of what makes this place special. The ones who understand the rules aren't suggestions. They're the foundation of our way of life." She raised her glass high, the Chardonnay catching the light. "So here's a toast to the favorite resident of Willow Creek Estates, me." Obviously, the dam broke. The room erupted in full-throated laughter and applause. It wasn't polite chuckling. It was affirming, validating. They were all in on the joke. And the punchline was every homeowner who'd ever been fined into submission, while Karen's inner circle broke every rule with impunity. Uncle Jim from the board roared, slapping the table. Carol, his wife, dabbed at her eyes, and Karen threw her head back and laughed the loudest of all. It was pure, unadulterated joy. The joke was true, and she loved it. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I watched the scene unfold with the detached interest of a scientist observing a predictable chemical reaction. While their laughter echoed off the beige walls, I raised my own glass in a silent salute. Then I brought it to my lips and drank, draining the rich, dark wine in one long, steady swallow. They couldn't see the small leather-bound hard drive nestled in my purse. It felt cool and heavy against my wallet, a tiny monolith containing a universe of truth. It held spreadsheets, scanned bank statements, and copies of emails with forged timestamps. It held the meticulously documented evidence of the last 3 years of Nora's community consulting fees, paid not by Karen's generosity but by funds quietly and illegally siphoned from the HOA treasury, transactions cleverly disguised as landscaping upgrades and event planning services. Transactions authorized by Karen herself. As Nora sat down to a round of applause, her face flushed with victory, I shifted slightly in my chair. My fingers found my phone in my purse with a simple, practiced movement of my thumb. I pressed a single icon on the screen. A tiny red dot appeared at the top, pulsing faintly. One quiet click. The microphone was active, recording the ambient sound of Karen's triumphant gala. The audio file would be a nice companion piece to the financial data. A little emotional color for the legal proceedings to come. I looked at Nora, truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time without the blinding filter of resentment. I saw a spoiled, coddled woman whose entire identity was built on a foundation of lies I was about to demolish. I looked at Karen, a woman who had confused enabling her daughter with loving the community, and who had sacrificed fair governance for the comfort of her own bloodline. The pity I felt was a distant academic thing. Tonight, I hadn't come to celebrate a decade of service. I had come to collect a debt. They had cast me as the supporting character in their neighborhood drama for my entire time here. The sensible, boring, reliable scenery. Tonight I was stepping into the light. Tonight I was ending my role as Claire Bennett, the quiet one. I was becoming the director, the writer, and the executioner of their story. And as Nora leaned over to kiss her mother's cheek, I allowed myself another smile. This one was real. Karen Whitaker is a master of the narrative. In the monthly board meetings, she could weave tales of sympathy for the troubled homeowners who dared question her. In public, her favorite story was that of her perfect community, to the local paper, to the new residents at orientation, to anyone who would listen. She was the proud president of the most harmonious HOA in the county. She would present the board as a matched set, two sides of the same brilliant coin. Nora, she has her mother's artistic soul, she'd say, gesturing to her daughter. And Claire, she'd continue, placing a heavy, proprietary hand on my shoulder at every meeting. She has my head for numbers. The perfect balance. It was a beautiful lie, polished to a high sheen through years of repetition. The reality was far less balanced. It was a scale permanently and deliberately tipped to one side. I paid my way through every HOA fine without complaint while Nora's violations, the unauthorized hot pink mailbox, the inflatable Santa that stayed up until July, the RV parked in the driveway for 6 months, were waved away with a wink and a family exception. I volunteered for the finance committee, balancing the books, remembering the due dates for every special assessment, making the quiet, sensible decisions that kept the neighborhood machinery running smoothly. I was the architect of their comfort, working from my home office with its single window overlooking the perfectly mowed lawn. Karen had once cited me for being 0.2 inches too long. Nora was the celebrated community consultant who painted murals on the clubhouse walls and threw parties that violated every noise ordinance after 9 p.m. My seriousness was a utility. Her frivolity was a gift, and for 6 years I had swallowed the bitterness, letting it settle deep in my gut. Cold, hard stone of resentment. Tonight, however, that stone was no longer an anchor weighing me down. It was a whetstone, and I had been sharpening my blade on it for months. The dynamic calcified into unshakable fact after the last election. Karen had stood on this very stage and declared, "Some residents feel things so deeply, they need extra care." She was right. Nora felt every whim with the intensity of a life-or-death crisis. I felt the profound tectonic frustration of watching my dues fund her lifestyle. But I processed it quietly because I knew the board didn't have the capacity to handle 2 dissenting voices. I had to be the strong one, the reasonable one. So I paid the fines, handled the paperwork, and made sure the community pool stayed open. Nora spent 6 weeks at a wellness retreat in Arizona, which the HOA accidentally reimbursed as a community morale project. Her fragility became her greatest asset. It absolved her of all responsibility. When she consulted on events that somehow always coincided with her European vacations, Karen nodded in sympathy. When she floated from one unpaid gig to the next, quitting after a few months, Karen praised her for exploring options. When she was 26, thoroughly unemployed, and living off her mother's credit card, Karen created a position for her on the board, personal assistant to the president. It came with a $75,000 annual stipend from the reserves. Her duties, as far as I could ever ascertain, consisted of having lunch with her mother twice a week and occasionally forwarding an email. Meanwhile, I had carved out my own role as the volunteer financial compliance specialist. Ironically, in the one field Karen truly respected, numbers, I was meticulous. 2 years ago, after a junior board member was caught padding expenses, Karen had come to me, her head for numbers resident, with a problem. She needed someone she could trust implicitly to overhaul the books. She needed someone ruthless, discreet, and above all, silent. She needed me. The offer was a double-edged sword. It was the first time she had ever acknowledged my skills as something more than a quaint hobby. But it also meant stepping directly into her world, the very world that had always favored Nora. I took the job. It was a mistake to think it was an olive branch. To her, it was just a sensible business decision. I was the best person for the job, and I was already here a bargain. So I went to work every evening in my home office, combing through the HOA accounts line by line, rooting out inefficiencies and potential liabilities. I was good at it. I found patterns others missed. I saw the narrative hidden in the numbers. And that is how I found her. It started as a small anomaly, a recurring vendor payment that lacked proper invoicing. Whitaker Community Consulting LLC. The name was so brazen it was almost comical. It was listed under Event Planning Services, a catch-all category with notoriously lax oversight. The first payment was for $22,000 dated 3 years ago, shortly after Nora had decided her McMansion was creatively stifling. Then another for $28,000 a few months later. They came like clockwork every 2 or 3 months, the amounts varying just enough to avoid automated flagging by the accounting software. My blood ran cold. This wasn't her absurd stipend. This was theft laundered through the HOA accounts. I pulled the corporate registration for Whitaker Community Consulting LLC. The sole proprietor was listed as Nora Whitaker. The address was a P.O. box in a town she'd never visited. The final piece was the authorization signature on the payment requests. It was Karen's, a clean, decisive scroll I could recognize in my sleep. I spent the next 3 months in a state of quiet, focused fury. During the day, I performed my volunteer duties flawlessly. At night, I built my case. I downloaded every transfer record. I cross-referenced the dates of the payments with Nora's social media posts. The $38,000 transfer in May of last year coincided with her 2-week trip to Tuscany. The $52,000 from last December matched the down payment on her new Tesla. It was all there, a road map of their shared deceit paid for by every homeowner's monthly dues and ultimately the community's future projects. There were 24 transactions in total. The grand sum was $760,000. A part of me, the part that still desperately wanted the neighborhood in the storybook, wanted to believe Karen was being duped. But the evidence was undeniable. The careful creation of the shell company, the varied payment amounts, her direct authorization. She was Nora's willing accomplice. She was stealing from her own neighbors to fund her favorite daughter's lifestyle, all while paying me a respectable volunteer thank you gift card to make sure no one else did the same. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I could have gone to the other board members. I could have reported it to the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. But that would have been messy and the narrative would have been stolen from me. They would have framed it as a family misunderstanding, a caring mother making a terrible mistake. I would have been the whistleblowing troublemaker, an object of pity or scorn. I refused to be a footnote in my own story. I needed more than just the facts. I needed the truth to land with the force of a judgment. I needed a stage, an audience, and the perfect poetic moment. A moment where the lie of the perfect community was at its most radiant, its most celebrated. A moment where its destruction would be the most complete. So I kept my silence. I copied the files onto the encrypted hard drive. I backed them up to a secure cloud server. And I waited. I watched Karen praise Nora's growing business acumen at every board meeting, a knowing smirk playing on her lips. I listened to Nora complain about the stresses of being a freelance consultant, while her pool was installed using community enhancement funds. I played my part as the serious, oblivious treasurer, all while counting down the days to this very gala, the celebration of Karen's decade of service, the ultimate monument to the narrative she had so carefully constructed. And it would be the site of its public demolition. Tonight wasn't just about exposing a crime. It was about balancing the books on a lifetime of emotional and financial fraud. My home office is a testament to calculated sterility. It sits in the corner of my townhouse with a panoramic view of the identical rooftops of Willow Creek. The furniture is minimalist white desk, black chair. The surfaces are perpetually clear, and the air is filtered to a crisp, impersonal chill. There are no family photos on my desk, no sentimental trinkets. There is only a high-resolution monitor, a keyboard that clicks with quiet efficiency, and the neat ordered stacks of files that constitute my world. In this space, I am not Claire Bennett, the fined resident. I am C. Bennett, the HOA's unofficial compliance officer. Here the numbers don't lie and sentiment is a liability. It is the only place I have ever truly felt in control. My primary function is to be the community's immune system. I conduct internal audits, stress test financial controls, and ensure that every dollar that flows through our accounts is accounted for, justified, and unimpeachably legal. The most tedious and therefore most crucial part of my job is the monthly expense review. It's a painstaking process of sifting through hundreds of pages of digital receipts, invoices, and reimbursement requests from the senior board members' extravagant planning lunches, down to the pool boys' overtime meal allowances. It is a portrait of the neighborhood painted in expenditures. I found the first thread of the lie on a Tuesday afternoon in early spring. I was deep in the third quarter review, my eyes scanning the endless columns of the general ledger. Most entries were mundane. Landscaping contract, office supplies, pool chemicals. But then a name appeared that made my fingers freeze over the keyboard. Whitaker Community Consulting LLC. It was coded to event planning, a notoriously nebulous category. Public relations in the HOA world is an amorphous beast. It can mean anything from a press release to a $1,000 bottle of wine sent to a valued inspector. It's a budget designed for schmoozing, for maintaining image, and as such, it's often the first place people look to hide financial indiscretions. Karen knew this. She had taught me this. The payment was for $22,000. The invoice attached was a masterpiece of vagueness. It simply read, Consulting Services rendered Q1. There was no breakdown of hours, no description of work performed, no project code, just a company name, her name, and a number. It had been approved with Karen's digital signature. My heart did not start to race. A strange cold calm settled over me instead. This was my world. This was a puzzle. I opened the vendor files. Whitaker Community Consulting LLC had been added to our system 36 months prior. I cross-referenced the date with my own memory. It was a week after Nora had called her mother in a tearful panic, claiming her McMansion was creatively stifling and she needed to move to a more artistically inspiring loft space that was naturally twice the rent. I continued my work, clicking through the months, then the years. The payments appeared with unnerving regularity, a secret stipend disguised as a business expense. Each invoice was the same, a blank, uninformative document approved by Karen Whitaker. I methodically downloaded every single one. I didn't save them to the HOA server. I saved them to a sandboxed folder on my local drive, a digital quarantine. Then I began the paper trail. I printed each invoice from Whitaker Community Consulting LLC. The flimsy paper felt profane in my hands. On the top right corner of each one, I wrote in neat black ink, Documentation insufficient, pending audit. It was a standard compliance notation, a flag that would mean nothing to a casual observer, but to an investigator, It would show that the issue had been identified and that I had been doing my job. I placed the printed invoices into a plain manila folder which I locked in the bottom drawer of my desk, a drawer for which only I had the key. My diligence was my camouflage. No one questioned the long hours I kept. "That's just Claire," the other volunteers would say, seeing my light on as they left for the evening. "She loves her spreadsheets." I was the boring one, the reliable one, the human equivalent of a calculator. It never occurred to them that a calculator in the right hands can be a weapon. They saw my focus and read it as dedication to the community. They never imagined it could be dedication to its undoing. The mask of the diligent volunteer allowed me access to everything. I could query databases, pull transaction histories, and review corporate card statements without raising a single eyebrow. It was during one of these late-night sessions that I found the spa receipt. It was a moment of such audacious carelessness that I almost laughed out loud in the silent office. There it was on the senior board corporate account. The one Karen and 3 other top members used for high-level expenses, a charge for $3,200. The vendor was the Serenity Spa, a luxury wellness retreat in the Berkshires. The card holder was listed as Karen Whitaker, but the detailed receipt, which I pulled from the credit card portal, showed the services rendered: a diamond renewal package, a champagne and rose petal hydrotherapy session, and a private yoga consultation. I knew for a fact Karen considered yoga frivolous stretching. But I also knew Nora had just posted a series of smug Instagram photos from a plush white-robed weekend in the Berkshires captioned, "Self-care blessed." She hadn't even tried to hide it. She had used the HOA credit card not for a clever deniable expense, but for a day of personal pampering that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. It was a testament to her absolute, unshakable sense of entitlement. She believed she was untouchable. She believed the rules did not apply to her because mommy would fix it. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I took a high-resolution screenshot of the transaction details within the accounting system. I captured the date, the amount, the vendor, and the card holder. I took another screenshot of the detailed receipt from the credit card portal. I saved them both as PDFs. The file names a sterile string of numbers and letters. Then I dragged them along with every invoice and bank transfer record related to Whitaker Community Consulting LLC into a single folder. From my purse, I took out the USB drive. It was a sleek black stick of encrypted hardware, the kind journalists and intelligence agents use. I had paid $300 for it online. I plugged it into my computer. After I entered a 32-character password, a virtual drive appeared on my screen. I dragged the folder into it. I watched the progress bar fill. A thin blue line representing Karen's betrayal and her daughter's greed. When the transfer was complete, I ejected the drive, pulled it from the port, and clicked it back into its cap. The secrets were now portable. They were mine. As I sat there in the dark, the neighborhood lights twinkling below me like a fallen constellation, profound clarity washed over me. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is a hot, messy emotion. This was something colder, purer. It was certainty. I didn't need to scream or cry or confront them in a tearful rage. That was Nora's language. She operated in the realm of emotional outbursts and dramatic scenes, confident that her mother would always rush to soothe and absolve her. To fight her on that turf was to lose before I even began. My power was in the silence, in the facts, in the cold, hard data stored on the chip in my hand. I didn't need to raise my voice. I just needed to wait for the perfect quiet moment to turn on the lights and let everyone see the squalor they'd been living in. The most painful and most liberating realization was this: Karen would choose her. If I confronted her privately, she would find a way to justify it. She would rationalize. She would bargain. She would accuse me of being jealous and vindictive. She would lie to me, and then she would lie to herself. In the end, she would circle the wagons around her fragile favorite child, and I would be left on the outside, pariah in my own neighborhood. She would choose the lie because the lie was more comfortable. But that was the beauty of my plan. I wasn't asking her to choose. The choice would no longer be hers to make. I couldn't make Karen see the truth, but I could make the entire community see it. The board members she was stealing from, the homeowners whose dues she was violating, the local news that held her in such high esteem. They lived by a different code, one of ethics, regulations, and consequences. In their world, the numbers on a ledger meant more than a president's misguided favoritism. In the court of the HOA, I would always lose. But in the world outside, the world of facts, I had already won. The execution phase began exactly 1 week before the gala, triggered by an email from Nora. It arrived on a Friday afternoon. The subject line, a chipper, Mom's Big 10. The message itself was a masterclass in her brand of passive aggression. A velvet glove hiding a fist of condescension. Dearest Claire, just a quick reminder that we're all counting on you to be there for Mom's big night. It's going to be a truly special, elegant affair at the community center. I've handled all the arrangements, so all you need to do is show up and look lovely. Attire is formal, of course. And please, let's make this a wonderful drama-free evening for her. She deserves it. Can't wait to see you. Zoxo Nora. Formal attire, no drama. It was a directive, not a request. A preemptive strike against the sour, serious resident who might otherwise cast a shadow on her sunshine. She was managing me, handling me just as she handled everything else by assuming her will was law. I read the email twice, the thin, cold smile playing on my lips. I typed a brief reply, my fingers moving with serene purpose. Don't worry, I'll behave. I hit send. Let her read that as submission. Let her believe she had successfully put me in my place. The well-behaved rarely make history. My preparations had been underway for weeks. Quiet, methodical series of acquisitions and tests. That evening, I laid out my tools on the clean, cool surface of my kitchen island. First, the necklace. It was a simple, elegant piece I'd ordered from a German security tech website. A small silver locket on a delicate chain. To the naked eye, it was unremarkable. The kind of jewelry one might wear to a formal event and forget about, but nestled in the intricate filigree of the locket's design was the lens of a high-def pinhole camera no larger than the head of a pin. I had spent the previous weekend testing it, walking around my townhouse, sitting, standing, turning my head. I connected it via Bluetooth to a dedicated app on my phone. The video feed was shockingly clear, the audio crisp. I practiced angling my body to capture conversations without being obvious. It was a perfect silent witness. Next was the outreach on Monday. During my lunch break, I left my townhouse and walked 6 blocks to a public library. I never used my own network for sensitive tasks. I sat at a public terminal, the keyboard sticky with the residue of 100 strangers, and created a new anonymous email address through a secure end-to-end encrypted provider based in Switzerland. The username was a random string of letters and numbers. My target was a journalist named Marcus Thorne. Thorne wasn't a gossip columnist. He was a shark. He was an investigative financial reporter for a major national newspaper, a Pulitzer finalist with a reputation for dismantling suburban empires. He had a particular interest in old money HOAs and the rot that often festered beneath their perfectly manicured lawns. Most importantly, he had a professional loathing for Karen, who had once successfully defended her community standards against one of his exposés on selective enforcement. Karen had won the battle, but Thorne never forgot the humiliation. He was the perfect vector. I drafted the email, keeping it short, cryptic, and irresistible. Subject: Willow Creek Story. Mr. Thorne, something is rotten at Willow Creek Estates. If you want an inside look, be at the community center this Saturday at 8 p.m. is Karen Whitaker's 10th anniversary gala. A source. I attached no files, offered no proof. The lack of evidence was in itself a power move. Projected confidence. And the Whitaker name was bait. He couldn't possibly resist. Our neighborhood was a pillar of the county, a local dynasty. The mere suggestion of a crack in that facade would be enough. I sent the email, logged out, and cleared the browser history. As I walked out of the library and back into the sunlight, I felt the satisfying click of a key turning in a well-oiled lock. The final piece of the digital puzzle was the delivery mechanism. Sending the files from my phone at the gala was too risky. A network glitch or slow connection could ruin the timing. Instead, I programmed a delivery script through a secure cloud service I used for work. I uploaded the entire dossier, the 24 invoices from Whitaker Community Consulting LLC, the bank transfer confirmations, the spa receipt, and a concise, bullet-pointed summary of the fraud I'd written myself to a password-protected folder. The script I wrote was simple but effective. I would send a single blank email from my phone to a unique pre-generated address linked to the cloud service. The receipt of this email would act as the trigger, initiating an automated instantaneous distribution of the folder's contents to a preset list of recipients. The other 5 board members, the HOA's chief financial officer, every homeowner on the email list, the head of the state's Consumer Protection Division, and Marcus Thorne. It was a digital dead man's switch. All I had to do was press send on a single harmless-looking draft I would have waiting on my phone. On the night of the gala, I dressed with deliberate understatement. I chose a simple sleeveless black sheath dress. It was elegant, impeccably tailored, and utterly forgettable. It was a uniform, the dark backdrop against which the main event would unfold. I clasped the silver locket around my neck, the cool metal a comforting weight against my skin. I checked the connection to my phone one last time. The camera was live. The encrypted hard drive, my insurance policy, was a small, dense rectangle in my slim clutch. When I arrived at the community center, the performance was already in full swing. Nora was a supernova in scarlet silk, a gown that shimmered and flowed around her as she moved through the room. She was adorned with diamond earrings and a matching bracelet, gifts from her mother that glittered with every practiced laugh. Her smile was a wide, brilliant public relations masterpiece. She greeted me at the door, air-kissing the space beside my cheeks. "Claire, you came and you look so classic." The word was meant as a compliment, but it landed like a judgment. Classic, reliable, boring. "You look beautiful, Nora," I said, my voice even. "Red is your color." "It's Mom's favorite," she replied with a conspiratorial wink, as if sharing a precious secret. As I took my seat at the table, the plan felt less like a scheme and more like a law of physics. It was an act of correction, a rebalancing of an equation that had been wrong for years. I watched Karen beam at Nora. I listened to the sycophantic praise of the guests. I felt the familiar weight of my own invisibility. But tonight, it wasn't a burden. It was my armor. It was my advantage. The moment came just as I knew it would. After the main course plates were cleared, Nora stood, tapping her glass. The room fell silent. I discreetly pulled my phone from my clutch, resting it in my lap below the line of the table. My thumb hovered over the screen, over the waiting email draft. Nora began her speech, her voice resonating with rehearsed emotion. "To my mother, the most generous, brilliant president I know." My eyes were on her, but my focus was on my thumb. The room was warm, filled with the low hum of contentment. The world seemed to slow down, every detail becoming sharp and clear. The way the candlelight caught the edge of my wine glass, the sound of Karen's soft, proud sigh, the insincere smiles on the faces of her board members. She taught me that community is everything, Nora continued, her gaze sweeping the room. My thumb pressed down on the smooth, cool glass of the screen. I felt the slight haptic buzz of confirmation. The blank email. The trigger was sent. It was gone, flying through the ether to a server hundreds of miles away. So, a toast? Nora declared, raising her glass high, her diamonds flashing. She paused for dramatic effect, a little smirk playing on her lips. To the favorite president, me. Obviously. The laughter erupted around me, a wave of validation for her and a final confirmation of my own status. It didn't matter. As the sound washed over me, I glanced down at my phone in my lap. A notification had appeared on the screen. A simple, beautiful, devastating confirmation from the cloud service. It consisted of 2 words, file sent. For a long suspended moment after Nora's toast, the world continued as it should. The laughter subsided into warm chuckles. Guests raised their glasses to Karen, and the waitstaff began to circulate, refilling champagne flutes. Nora, glowing from her moment in the spotlight, sat down and squeezed her mother's arm. Everything was perfect. It was the flawless final frame of their perfect community portrait. Just before the glass shattered, the first ripple was almost imperceptible. Karen's phone, resting face down on the tablecloth beside her plate, emitted a low, discreet buzz. She ignored it, still smiling at a compliment from one of her board members. 5 seconds later, it buzzed again and again, a persistent, insistent vibration that began to cut through the festive atmosphere. A small frown line appeared between her eyebrows. She casually reached over and silenced it, but she was too late. Across the table, another phone lit up. It was Arthur, Karen's oldest board ally, a man whose face was a permanent mask of weary disapproval. He glanced at his screen and his genial expression vanished, replaced by a sharp, confused intake of breath. Then a third phone belonging to the HOA's CFO, who had been laughing at Nora's joke moments before. His face went rigid. It was a silent digital plague, spreading from device to device among the key players of Willow Creek. The air at our end of the table grew thick and cold. The casual conversation faltered, replaced by a tense, humming silence. The guests further down, oblivious, continued to chat and laugh, their voices sounding jarringly loud and cheerful in the suddenly frozen pocket of our reality. Karen's smile was gone now, a strained, waxy imitation plastered on her face. Her eyes darted from Arthur's pale face to the CFO's grimly set jaw. She knew. She didn't know how, but she knew what they were all looking at. Her own phone began to buzz again. A frantic, desperate rhythm, ignoring her attempts to silence it. It was a cascade of notifications, emails, text messages, alerts from the HOA's group chat, a digital scream with a hand that trembled slightly. She picked it up, her thumb swiped across the screen. I watched her as she read. I watched the blood drain from her face, leaving her skin a ghastly, papery white. Her jaw went slack, her lips parting in a silent gasp. The illusion of the powerful, charming president dissolved in an instant, leaving behind a terrified middle-aged woman. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the polished floor. The sound was so violent it silenced the entire room. "Mom!" Nora's voice was small, laced with a confusion that was rapidly turning to fear. "What's wrong?" She didn't seem to hear her. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, staring at some unseen horror. Arthur leaned across the table, his voice a low, urgent whisper that sliced through the silence. "Karen, what the hell is this email? Is the HOA being audited? Is this a joke?" Karen flinched as if struck. She looked at Arthur, then at me. For one searing, incandescent second, our eyes met across the table. In hers, I saw it all, the dawning comprehension, the stark terror, and the deepest, most profound betrayal. She knew it was me. She finally saw me. Without a word, she turned and walked away from the table. She didn't stride. She stumbled, weaving between chairs, her movement stiff and uncoordinated like a marionette with its strings cut. She pushed through the doors of the main hall and disappeared. The room was left in a state of suspended animation. Then chaos erupted in whispers. What was that? Is she ill? Did you see her face? Through the large glass window that looked out onto the entrance, I could see Karen fumbling for her coat. And waiting for her just outside the main door was a man in a trench coat, a professional-grade camera being raised to his eye. Marcus Thorne, punctual as always. A series of bright, silent flashes illuminated Karen's horrified face as she recoiled, shielding her eyes like a creature of the dark exposed to the sun. Nora, ever the family's publicist, jumped to her feet, forcing a bright, brittle laugh. "Oh, everyone, please don't worry," she announced to the room, her voice a little too loud, a little too shrill. "She's just tired. It's been a long, emotional day. She's probably just stepping out for some air." She was trying to smooth it over, to patch the gaping hole in her perfect party. She was performing, relying on the old magic that had always worked for her. But the spell was broken. No one was smiling anymore. The board members were huddled together, speaking in low, frantic tones. Their spouses looked on, their faces etched with confusion and concern. I decided it was time to change the lighting. I stood up slowly, my chair making no sound on the thick carpet. I picked up Nora's half-full champagne flute from the table. The crystal was cool against my fingertips. She turned to me, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes, ready to shush me, to tell me to sit down and not make things worse. "Yeah," I said, my voice clear and calm, easily carrying to the nearest tables. "She's tired. Tired of pretending." I took a sip from her glass. The champagne was warm, its bubbles gone flat. Tasted like disappointment. Nora stared at me. The carefully constructed mask of the charming hostess fell away, revealing the raw, frightened face beneath. The gears were turning in her mind, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying speed, the toast. My strange placid smile, my presence, my timing. Her eyes widened, the color draining from her cheeks to match her mother's. "Claire," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It was a question, an accusation, and a plea all at once. "What did you do?" I placed her glass back on the table, setting it down with a soft, deliberate click. I looked her directly in the eye, holding her terrified gaze. There was no need for anger, for shouting, for any of the dramatic fireworks she specialized in. There was only the cold, quiet truth. "Just balance the books," I said. As the words left my lips, another series of camera flashes erupted from outside, their stark white light strafing the room and silhouetting Nora's stunned face. She flinched, her mouth opening and closing silently. She finally understood. This wasn't a neighborhood squabble. This was a demolition. The party was over. It didn't end. It evaporated. Guests began to murmur their excuses, folding their napkins and avoiding eye contact as they made their hasty retreats. They were fleeing a disaster scene, desperate not to be caught in the fallout. Within minutes, the room was a landscape of half-eaten desserts and abandoned wine glasses. The only ones left were the board members, still clustered in their panicked cabal, and Nora standing frozen beside the empty head of the table. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared at me, her expression a hollow mask of disbelief. The silence that stretched between us was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. It was the silence of the end. The silence of two people who had built their lives on a comfortable lie, now forced to face a truth as cold and hard as the marble floor beneath their feet. They had always believed my endurance was infinite. They had just discovered it had a price. The morning after was unnervingly quiet. I woke before my alarm, the gray dawn light filtering through my blinds. There was no giddy rush of triumph, no bitter taste of regret. There was only a profound and unsettling stillness, the kind that follows a massive storm. The world had been fundamentally altered, and I had slept soundly through the night. I showered, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that was the sartorial equivalent of a stone wall, and made my coffee. It was Sunday, but I knew I had to go to the community center. The first aftershock was scheduled to arrive at 9 a.m. sharp. I was sitting in my home office reviewing a meaningless quarterly report when they arrived. 4 of them, 2 men and 2 women, dressed in the sober, nondescript suits of state investigators. They didn't stride into the lobby with sirens and flashing lights. Their arrival was far more terrifying. It was silent. They were met by Arthur, who looked as if he hadn't slept in a decade, and were led directly into the main boardroom, the one reserved for the senior members, the one with Karen's portrait on the wall. The other volunteers, the few who had been called in on a Sunday, watched from their desks with wide, fearful eyes. A quiet toxic fear began to seep into the very air conditioning. I watched them go, my face a mask of neutral diligence, and took a sip of my coffee. The demolition was proceeding on schedule. At 10:17, an email landed in every homeowner's inbox. It was a community-wide notification from the board secretary. The subject line was stark: personnel update. The body of the message was a masterpiece of corporate euphemism designed to say everything by saying almost nothing. Effective immediately, Nora Whitaker, community consultant, has been placed on administrative leave pending the results of an internal review. Her access to HOA property and systems has been temporarily suspended. We ask that all residents respect the confidential nature of this process. All inquiries related to her duties should be redirected to the managing board's office. I read it 3 times. Administrative leave, internal review, temporarily suspended. They were the cold, sterile words used to excise a tumor from the corporate body. In a single paragraph, they had erased her entire fictitious career. I imagined Nora reading the same email on her phone, watching her access to the community she treated as her personal bank account vanish in a puff of legal ease. I felt a flicker of something, a distant academic pity, and then it was gone. I moved the email to a new folder on my hard drive. I labeled it Consequences. My own phone rang just before noon. The caller ID simply read Karen. I let it ring 4 times, a small petty assertion of control. Before answering, I didn't speak. I just listened to the sound of her breathing on the other end of the line. It was ragged, shallow. The confident, booming voice that had commanded board meetings was gone, replaced by the weary rasp of a defeated woman. "Claire," she finally said, her voice cracking on my name. There was a long pause. "How did you do it? How did you send all of that?" There was no anger in her voice, only a hollow, exhausted curiosity. She wasn't accusing me of a crime. She was asking a magician how the trick was done. She still couldn't comprehend that the quiet, sensible resident, the one she'd built the system to exclude, was the one who had learned its every secret and turned it against her. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the identical rooftops. "I didn't send anything, Karen," I replied, my voice perfectly level, devoid of any emotion. It was the new compliance protocol I implemented last quarter. The system automatically cross-references large expenditures with vendor legitimacy and flags anomalies directly to the board and the state. It's a security feature. I paused, letting the lie settle. A lie built on a foundation of truth. It doesn't like fraud. Silence. Deep, profound silence stretched down the line. I could hear her processing it. I hadn't confessed to an act of war. I had described an impersonal automated process. I had removed myself from the equation entirely. I hadn't destroyed her. The system had a system I created. A system she paid me to create. The beautiful, vicious irony of it was my real victory. When she finally spoke again, all she said was a quiet, broken, "I see," and the line went dead. An hour later, Marcus Thorne's article went live. The headline exploded across the top of the county's most respected news site. Willow Creek HOA under investigation for alleged family-linked fraud. The story was brutal, efficient, and thoroughly sourced. Thorne didn't mention me by name. He was too good a journalist for that. But he quoted sources within the community who spoke of a pattern of highly irregular payments to a shell company owned by the daughter of HOA President Karen Whitaker. He had a photo of Karen leaving the center the night before. Her face a mask of horror in the stark light of the camera's flash. The private shame of our neighborhood was now public record. The next day, I went to the community center at my usual time, 8:30 a.m. The atmosphere in the lobby was funereal. The usual morning chatter was gone, replaced by hushed whispers and averted eyes. As I walked towards the boardroom, the whispers ceased. People flattened themselves against the walls as if I were radioactive. The meeting room was an exercise in social awkwardness. 3 junior volunteers who normally chattered endlessly about their weekends stood in rigid silence, staring intently at the floor numbers as they lit up. They knew. Everyone knew. They just didn't know what to do with me. I was no longer Claire, the boring treasurer. I was a ghost at the feast, a walking embodiment of the HOA's implosion. I was a stranger. I found that I liked it. Invisibility had been a prison. This new fearsome visibility was a kind of power. I ate lunch alone at my desk, a habit that was no longer born of social awkwardness, but of choice. I opened the news article on my phone and scrolled past the professional analysis to the comment section at the bottom. It was a cesspool of outrage, speculation, and schadenfreude, a digital town square calling for Karen's head. Most of it was just noise. But then I saw one comment buried deep in the thread from an anonymous user. It was simple. I was a resident here 10 years ago. They bled me dry with fines while letting insiders build whatever they wanted. I'm not surprised by this. Whoever exposed this, thank you. I stared at the words on the screen. Thank you. From a stranger, a person whose life had been negatively impacted by the very system of arrogance and entitlement I had just torpedoed. It was a validation more profound than any apology, more satisfying than any inheritance. Karen and Nora had spent my entire time here making me feel like my contributions were worthless. But in that one moment, I had confirmation that my actions had meaning far beyond the petty confines of their neighborhood drama. I closed the browser and took a bite of my sandwich. I didn't need my name in the paper. I didn't need the board to thank me for saving the community from Karen's corruption. I didn't need a single person in this building to know that I was the one who had set the fire. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. I didn't need the credit. I just needed the justice. And for the first time in my life, the books were finally balanced. The summons came 2 days later, not as a phone call, but as a sterile, impersonal email from a woman I didn't know, who was now listed as the interim board secretary. It requested the presence of both myself and Nora Whitaker for a meeting in the small conference room at 10 o'clock the following day. It was a command disguised as a calendar invitation. The small room had no windows. It was where difficult private conversations went to die. I arrived at 9:55. The room was exactly as I remembered it. A long polished table that reflected the harsh white fluorescent lights from the ceiling, 12 black leather chairs standing like silent jurors, and a single sterile phone in the center. The air was cold, recycled, and smelled faintly of industrial cleaner. I chose a chair halfway down the table on the opposite side from the door and placed my leather-bound portfolio in front of me, though I had no intention of opening it. I sat, my back straight, my hands folded on the cool surface of the table and waited. Nora was let in at 10 o'clock on the dot by the new secretary, who then quietly closed the door behind her, sealing us in. My sister-in-arms looked like a ghost haunting the memory of her former life. She was wearing an expensive cream cashmere sweater and slacks, but they were rumpled as if she'd slept in them. Her face was puffy and blotchy, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. The vibrant, confident glow she had worn her entire life had been extinguished, leaving behind a sallow, frightened pallor. She didn't look at me. She scurried to the chair at the far end of the table, as far away from me as possible, and collapsed into it, wrapping her arms around herself as if she were freezing. The door opened again. Karen entered. The past 3 days had stripped 20 years from her life. Her shoulders, which had always been squared with the arrogance of a woman accustomed to winning, were slumped in defeat. Her blonde hair was uncharacteristically messy, and her face was a road map of gray, weary lines. She carried a single thick file folder. She walked to the head of the table and dropped it. It landed with a heavy, deadening thud that seemed to shake the entire room. The sound was one of finality. She didn't sit. She stood there, leaning on the table with her hands, the file folder lying between them. For a full minute, the only sound was the faint, high-pitched hum of the fluorescent lights above us. She looked at Nora's huddled form. Then her gaze shifted to me. Her eyes were hollow, defeated. The fire was gone. Nora broke the silence. A loud, gulping sob escaped her lips, and then the dam of her manufactured victimhood broke. "I didn't know anything, Mom," she wailed. The tears she'd clearly been holding back now streaming down her face. She was looking at her voice reverting to the childish, desperate plea that had always been her most effective weapon. "I swear I didn't. I thought it was from your personal account. I thought it was a gift. You know, I don't understand business stuff. Claire did this. She set this all up to look like it was me. She framed me." Her voice grew in pitch and volume, a hysterical performance designed to engender sympathy and deflect all blame. She was playing her greatest hit, the one that had always worked, the one where she was the fragile, innocent victim of a world too complex for her to understand. I didn't move. I didn't change my expression. I let her finish. Let the last of her pathetic sobs echo in the sterile room. When she was done, still sniffling and looking at her mother for the rescue that was not coming, I spoke. My voice was quiet, calm, and cut through her manufactured hysteria like a surgeon's scalpel. "If you didn't know anything, Nora," I said, my eyes fixed on hers, "then why is the corporate registration for Whitaker Community Consulting LLC in your name? Why did you sign the documents to open its business bank account?" Nora's head snapped toward me. Her mouth opened, then closed. The tears stopped as if a faucet had been shut off. Her face, which had been a mask of tearful pleading, went blank with the shock of being confronted by an irrefutable fact. She had no answer. There was no answer. In her world, she'd never needed one. Her emotions had always been enough. Karen made a harsh, grating sound in her throat. She pushed herself away from the table, her face contorting in a spasm of her old familiar anger. It was the last dying ember of her authority. "Enough!" she roared, slamming her fist down on the table. The file folder jumped, and Nora flinched violently. "Both of you, this is a mess, but it's not the end of the world. I've spoken with Arthur. We have a strategy. There are ways to mitigate this. We can fix this." She was looking at me, speaking to me, the reasonable one. She was trying to pull me back into my old role, the one where I helped her clean up the community's messes. She was a fixer. To her, this was just another problem to be managed. A fire to be contained with the right combination of money, influence, and legal maneuvering. She still didn't understand. She thought this was about the HOA. I slowly shook my head. No, Karen, I said, my voice still quiet, still unyielding. There is nothing for us to fix. I don't need to fix this. A look of genuine confusion crossed her face. She was offering me a way back in. A chance to be part of the solution, and I was refusing. She couldn't comprehend it. I don't need a strategy, I continued, leaning forward slightly. I don't need you to make this go away. I need you to admit it. She stared at me, her eyes narrowing. Admit what, Claire? What in God's name is there to admit now? She was exasperated, lost. She thought the crime had already been exposed. What more could there possibly be? This was it. The entire purpose of the last 6 months of my entire life, distilled into a single, quiet confrontation in a cold, windowless room. The money, the fraud, the HOA. That was all just the leverage, the key to get me into this room and force her to face the actual crime. I need you to admit, I said, my voice dropping to just above a whisper, forcing her to lean in, forcing her to listen, that I was never the mistake in this community. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and solid. They were so much more than an accusation. They were the truth of my entire existence laid bare on the polished empty table. It wasn't about the money she gave Nora. It was about the worth she had never given me. It was about the 6 years of being the serious one, the afterthought, the responsible, unlovable bedrock upon which they built their world of sunshine and carelessness. It was about being treated not like a resident, but like a function, a utility, an error in the equation of her perfect neighborhood. Nora let out a small, confused whimper. She didn't understand. She was incapable of understanding, but Karen did. I saw it in her eyes. I saw the lifetime of quiet dismissals, of overlooked achievements, of taken-for-granted loyalty, all flash before her in an instant. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to argue, to defend, to rationalize it all away as she always had, but no words came out. Her face, already so pale, seemed to crumble. The last of her strength, the last of her denial, gave way. She stood there for a long, silent moment, her gaze locked on mine, and then slowly she lowered her head. Her shoulders slumped forward and her chin dropped to her chest in a gesture of absolute unequivocal surrender. She stared down at the folder on the table at the black and white evidence of one crime while admitting to a much deeper one. She didn't say, "I'm sorry." She didn't have to. The gesture said everything. The proud, powerful Karen Whitaker was gone, and in her place was a woman bowing her head in shame before the resident she had finally broken. I watched her for a moment longer. That silent, defeated gesture was the only apology she was capable of giving, and it was the only one I had ever truly wanted. After the meeting, I went home. I did not see Karen or Nora leave the building. Their retreat was as silent and invisible to me as my long suffering had been to them. For 3 days, quiet, humming tension settled over the neighborhood. The investigators came and went, their faces impassive, their briefcases full. Work ground to a halt, replaced by whispered conversations in driveways and the frantic, silent refreshing of news websites. The air was thick with the anticipation of the next blow. Fell on a Wednesday. Marcus Thorne's follow-up piece was not just an article. It was a public autopsy. It ran on the front page of the county paper, a multi-page in-depth investigation complete with timelines, financial charts, and quotes from anonymous high-level sources. The headline was a masterpiece of devastating simplicity. Resident uncovers years of fraud inside prominent HOA. Thorne never used my name. He referred to me only as the longtime treasurer, a respected compliance volunteer within the association, who had uncovered the scheme during a routine internal audit. But in a county this small, in an HOA community this insular, the omission was a spotlight. Everyone knew. In a single elegant stroke, he had painted me as the reluctant, duty-bound hero, and Karen and Nora as the greedy, complicit villains. The narrative was now set in stone, and it was a story I had authored. The public reckoning was swift and merciless, a digital flash flood. For Nora, it was a particular kind of hell. Her life had been a curated performance for an online audience, a highlight reel of expensive brunches, European vacations, and designer clothes, all hashtagged with a nauseating sincerity. The comments section of her Instagram, once a garden of fawning praise, became a pit of vipers overnight. So this is what blessed looks like. Stealing from your mom's HOA. Mommy's little embezzler. I hope your prison uniform is as cute as that Prada bag you bought with stolen dues. Her digital world, her only real source of validation, was set ablaze. She tried to fight back at first, deleting the most vicious comments. But for everyone she removed, a dozen more appeared. Within 12 hours, her Instagram account, with its 10,000 followers and years of carefully constructed lies, was set to private. A day later, it was deleted entirely. Her Twitter followed suit. She vanished from the internet, scrubbed from the digital world as thoroughly as a confidential file from a server. She had built her identity on being seen, and now her only refuge was to become invisible. Karen's public downfall was more dignified, but no less complete. There was no online mob for her, just the cold, swift judgment of her peers. The day after the article ran, a board-wide email, even more sterile than the last, was sent out by Arthur. It announced that Karen Whitaker was taking an indefinite leave of absence and was stepping down from her position on the HOA executive board, effective immediately for health reasons. Health reasons. The classic face-saving excuse for the disgraced executive. It was a lie, but it was a necessary one. The final piece of corporate fiction to smooth over the jagged truth. She wasn't sick. The HOA was, and she was the disease. This was the board's way of amputating the infected limb before the gangrene could spread. Her 10-year reign, her legacy, her name on the welcome sign, all of it was being quietly, efficiently dismantled in the midst of the chaos. A letter arrived on my desk. It was hand-delivered. A thick cream envelope with the official seal of the state's Consumer Protection Division. My hands were steady as I opened it. The letter was brief and formal. It thanked me for my prompt and thorough cooperation in the ongoing investigation. It commended the robust internal controls I had put in place, the very controls I had used as the public justification for the data leak. They had bought my story completely, but it was the final paragraph that made my breath catch. Given the circumstances, it read, and to ensure the HOA's continued stability and adherence to regulatory standards during this transitional period, the Board of Directors, in consultation with our office, has requested that you assume the role of interim head of compliance and risk management for Willow Creek Estates. You would have full oversight and authority in all matters pertaining to the community's financial conduct. They were handing me the keys to the kingdom, not out of kindness, but out of necessity, in the wreckage of Karen's reputation. I had become the HOA's single greatest asset, the unimpeachable, incorruptible architect of the very system that had exposed the rot. My reputation as the serious one had been transformed from a neighborhood punchline into a mark of integrity. That evening, long after the last of the shell-shocked volunteers had gone home, I walked down the silent carpeted hallway to the corner office, Karen's old office. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The air was still, thick with the faint, lingering scent of her expensive perfume and old leather. Her desk was clear, her personal effects already packed away by an assistant. All that was left was the heavy mahogany furniture, The floor-to-ceiling windows with their commanding view of the neighborhood, and the symbols of her reign. My eyes were drawn to the wall behind the desk. There hung the large gold-framed photograph she cherished for over a decade. Whitaker family at the gala. It was a professional portrait taken in the clubhouse park. She stood in the center, a proud, beaming president. Nora, a vision in a yellow sundress, leaned against her, her head on her shoulder, laughing up at her. And there I was on the other side, a few inches of respectful distance between us. I was in a sensible navy dress, my smile small and polite, my posture straight. I was an accessory, a balancing element in the composition, there to complete the set. I walked behind the desk and stood before it. I looked at the smiling faces, at the perfect happy community that had never really existed. It was the ultimate lie preserved in a gilded frame. My fingers, steady and sure, found the edge of the frame. I lifted it off the brass hook. It was heavier than I expected. For a moment, I just held it, the weight of their world in my hands. Then I turned and placed it face down on the floor, leaning it against the wall, a relic for the archives. I looked at the empty hook, at the faint, lighter-colored rectangle on the wallpaper where the photo had hung for so long. The wall felt cleaner, the room brighter. This space no longer belonged to a woman. It belonged to an idea. I wouldn't hang a new photo. I would build a new entity. I thought of a name, a mission statement. Not an HOA built on the cult of personality, but a group built on a single guiding principle, the Willow Creek Integrity Association. The words formed in my mind, clean and strong. It was a promise. It was a cleansing. It was the future. This was my community now. I had taken it, not by force, but by a quiet, methodical application of the truth. I had no board to thank, no family to celebrate with. I felt no giddy thrill of victory, only the quiet, profound satisfaction of a job well done. I didn't need Nora. I didn't need Karen's approval. I didn't need anyone's congratulations. The work was enough. The request came a month after the world had been remade. Not in a summons or a command, but in a simple unadorned text message from a number I no longer had saved in my contacts. "Can we talk, Karen?" Just that. The absence of her usual authoritative tone was more telling than any confession. For a day I didn't respond. I let the message sit there, a quiet testament to the complete reversal of our dynamic. I was no longer waiting for her attention. She was now waiting for mine. The decision to meet was not for her. It was for me. It was the final quiet closing of a ledger that had been open for far too long. I chose the place, a small, unassuming diner called the Blue Plate, miles away from the oak-paneled country clubs she used to frequent. It was a place with no history for us, a neutral ground where the ghosts of our past would not be welcome. I arrived first, slipping into a worn vinyl booth in the back corner. It was late afternoon and the diner was nearly empty. Rain, a soft, persistent drizzle, traced lazy patterns down the large plate glass window beside me. The air smelled of old coffee, sizzling bacon, and wet pavement. The lighting was a low honey-colored yellow, a stark contrast to the unforgiving fluorescent glare of the boardroom where I had last seen her. A waitress with tired eyes filled a thick ceramic mug with coffee for me without being asked. The quiet clatter of her shoes on the linoleum floor and the low hum of the neon sign outside were the only sounds. This was a place for endings, not beginnings. She arrived 10 minutes later. I watched her in the reflection of the window before she saw me. The woman who walked through the door was a stranger wearing Karen's suit. The expensive tailored gray flannel hung on her now. Her frame diminished. Her powerful shoulders stooped. The 3 days of her initial downfall had aged her a decade. The subsequent month of public disgrace and private exile had aged her another. Her face was gaunt, her skin thin and pale, and her eyes, once sharp and commanding, were now heavy-lidded, weighted down by a sorrow so profound it seemed to physically pull at her features. She saw me and hesitated for a moment at the door, a woman uncertain of her welcome anywhere in the world. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She walked to the booth, her movements slow and deliberate, the walk of a woman navigating a minefield of pain. She slid onto the vinyl seat opposite me, the material sighing under her weight. She placed her hands on the table. They were her hands, but they were different now, the skin looser, the fingers laced with a faint, almost invisible tremor. We sat in silence as the waitress brought her a coffee. She murmured a thank you, her voice a dry, unused thing. She didn't touch the mug. She just stared down at the dark, swirling surface as if searching for an answer in its depths. The silence wasn't angry or tense. Not anymore. It was just empty, a vacuum where a lifetime of unspoken things had finally died. She was the one to break it, her eyes finally lifting to meet mine. "You won, Claire," she said, her voice a low, gravelly whisper. The words were a surrender, an admission of her defeat in the war she had never even realized she was fighting. But the word felt wrong. Cheap. This was never a game to be won. I shook my head slowly. "No, Karen," I replied, my voice as quiet as hers. "I didn't win. I just stopped pretending." She flinched, a small, barely visible tightening of the muscles around her eyes. She understood. My whole time here had been a performance of the beautiful, reasonable resident, a role I played because I thought it was the only way to earn a sliver of respect. The moment I stopped pretending, their world collapsed. My pretense had been the load-bearing wall in their house of cards. She looked away from me, her gaze drifting to the rain-streaked window. "I was wrong," she choked out, the words catching in her throat. It was a simple sentence, 3 small words, but they carried the weight of 6 years of neglect. It was the confession I had once thought I would die without ever hearing. Hearing it now in this quiet, lonely diner felt less like a victory and more like an autopsy report. The cause of death was already known. This was just the official confirmation. A part of me, the new resident girl still desperate for approval, wanted to seize on those words, to demand more. But the woman I was now knew it was pointless. The damage was done. The account settled. An apology now was like a bandage on a healed scar. "We don't need to say it," I said, my voice softening slightly. "You don't need to say anything else. Just remember that gala. Remember how happy you both were." I wanted her to hold on to that memory not as a moment of joy but as a perfect crystalline image of her own blindness. That was the only penance that mattered. She nodded slowly, a single hot tear escaping her eye and tracing a path down her weathered cheek. She wiped it away with the back of her hand, a gesture of such uncharacteristic vulnerability it was almost painful to watch. She looked at me again, her eyes pleading, searching. "Will you forgive me?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. It was the question of a drowning woman asking for a lifeline. I held her gaze, and for the first time, I didn't feel the sting of resentment or the cold satisfaction of revenge. I just felt a quiet, profound sense of finality. I looked past her, out the window at the gray, weeping sky. The rain was washing the neighborhood clean. "I already have," I said. And it was the truth. The anger, the bitterness, the rage. It had all been fuel. And the fire had burned itself out, leaving behind not ash, but a strange, quiet clarity. The forgiveness wasn't for her. It was for me. It was me putting down a burden I had carried for too long. I turned my gaze back from the window to meet hers. "But I won't forget." This was the important part. Forgiveness did not mean amnesia. It did not mean a return to the way things were. It was an acknowledgement of the past and a promise to myself that I would never allow it to be my future. A small, sad Impossibly weak smile touched her lips. It was a smile of relief, of gratitude, and of complete and utter defeat. She understood. She had her answer. I reached into my purse and pulled out a $20 bill, placing it on the table to cover our coffees. I slid out of the booth. My movements were fluid, unburdened. "Goodbye, Karen," I said. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I walked past the counter, nodded to the waitress, and pushed open the heavy glass door. The cool, damp air felt clean on my face. I stepped out into the soft rain, not bothering to shield myself from it. It was a gentle baptism. As I walked down the street, the neighborhood lights beginning to blur in the twilight, I felt the truth settle deep within my bones. There was no hatred left. There was no burning desire for more retribution. There was only a vast, quiet, and powerful tranquility. The deep, unshakable peace of a person who had fought a war she never wanted, had won it on her own terms, and had done it the right way. 1 year later, the neighborhood looked the same from the corner office in the community center, but the world within those glass walls was entirely new. The name on the door was still Willow Creek Estates, a concession to the legacy residents and the brand recognition that had survived the firestorm. But the soul of the HOA had been gutted, disinfected, and rebuilt from the foundation up. The recovery had been a brutal, exhausting climb, a year of long nights, tense negotiations with board members, and the slow, methodical process of earning back the trust that had been so casually squandered. I had led every step of it, and the residents had rewarded me. The title on my office door no longer read treasurer. It now read president. The first thing I had changed was the mission statement. Karen's old, vague platitudes about unwavering community dedication were replaced by a single uncompromising sentence. It was now etched in clean, modern lettering on the frosted glass wall of the main lobby. The first thing anyone saw when they stepped off the elevator. Integrity isn't inherited, it's earned. It was a motto, a warning, and a promise. It was the principle upon which every decision was now made. We had lost some board members in the transition, the ones who were too steeped in Karen's old way of doing business, of blurring lines for the sake of favoritism. I had let them go without a fight. The HOA was leaner now, but it was stronger, built on a bedrock of transparency I had enforced with relentless, unwavering resolve. We were no longer a personality-driven association. We were just an association, and we were finally a good one. Some ties, however, were harder to cut. Last week, an envelope had arrived in my personal mail. The stationery was thick and creamy. The address written in a familiar, looping, ostentatious script. It was an invitation. Nora was turning 30 and she was having a birthday party at a new trendy downtown restaurant. The invitation was a quiet, hopeful olive branch, a tentative attempt to see if the ashes of our neighborhood could be stirred back to life. I held the thick cardstock in my hand, reading the cheerful, professionally printed text. I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, not even the faint ghostly echo of community connection. It was like reading an advertisement for an event in a city I no longer lived in. A year ago, this invitation would have been a command performance. My absence would have been a scandal, a drama. Now, it was simply a choice, and it was an easy one to make. I walked over to the small industrial-grade shredder beside my desk and fed the invitation into the slot. The machine whirred to life, and in less than 3 seconds, Nora's hope of reconciliation was turned into a cascade of meaningless cross-cut confetti. I did not go. My office, Karen's old office, was different now. The heavy mahogany desk was still there, a monument to a fallen queen. But the room was brighter, the decor minimalist and clean. The ghosts had been exorcised. There was only one relic I had kept from the old regime. It sat in a simple, unadorned silver frame on the corner of my desk facing me. Not visitors. It was the old family photograph from the wall. Whitaker at the gala. I kept it not out of sentiment, but as a historical document. It was a reminder of the lie I had lived and the truth I had fought to establish. It was a picture of the woman I used to be, the quiet, overlooked resident at the edge of the frame, and a testament to the woman I had become. It was my own personal memorial to a war that was finally over. I picked it up now, the cool metal smooth in my hands. I looked at our faces, frozen in time. Karen, proud and blind. Nora, radiant and careless. And me, the serious one, the silent observer who had seen everything. I turned the frame over and unfastened the backing. I slid the photograph out. The back was blank, a clean white slate. I picked up a fine-tipped archival pen from my desk, the kind used for signing important documents. In my neat, precise handwriting, the same handwriting that had once annotated invoices with the words, pending audit, I wrote a new caption on the back of the photograph, to the favorite resident. Finally, I wasn't anointing myself in their eyes. Their opinion had long ceased to be the currency by which I measured my worth. This was my own acknowledgement. The favorite resident, I had come to realize, wasn't the one who received the most favoritism. It was the one who best upheld the community's honor. It was the one who chose integrity over comfort, truth over pretense. In the end, that had been me. I slid the photograph back into its frame, secured the backing, and placed it back on my desk. The account was settled. The end of the day came quietly. The sun bled across the horizon, painting the neighborhood in hues of orange and deep purple. I finished my last email, reviewed the final numbers for the quarter, and shut down my computer. The office fell into a soft, humming silence. I stood and put on my coat, the neighborhood lights twinkling to life in the deepening twilight. I walked to the door of my office, my hand resting on the light switch. I paused. My work here, the real work, was done. There was no more anger to fuel me, no more injustice to correct. There was only the quiet, steady rhythm of a life and a community built on a solid foundation. I didn't need any more revenge. All I had ever truly needed was to be recognized not for who they wanted me to be, but for who I actually was. I just needed the truth. My fingers flicked the switch. The office was plunged into darkness, save for the ambient glow of the neighborhood outside and a single low-wattage desk lamp I always left on, which cast a final focus pool of light on my desk. For a brief moment before the automatic timer turned it off, the light caught the edge of a small discreet brass plaque I had commissioned for myself. It sat next to the family photograph, a private mantra visible only to me. The light illuminated the engraved words, a final definitive statement on the entire affair. Compliance is revenge done right. My work was done. Sound of a subtle faint audio click as if a recording is playing at the gala. Karen toasted to the favorite president. I smiled back because I finally was.